This month, Planned Parenthood is celebrating the 100th anniversary of Margaret Sanger, founding what would become the largest abortion operation in America. As they celebrate, you need to educate yourself on who Margaret Sanger was, what she believed, and how it affects you today. I'm joined by Steve Carlin in Wisconsin and Robert Cahoon in England to discuss Margaret Sanger on this episode of the 40 Days for Life podcast.
This is the beginning of the end of abortion.
And you can be a part of it.
Learn how you can help women change hearts and minds
And save lives right where you live. Be inspired to build a culture of life.
This is the 40 Days for Life show
With your host,
Sean Carney.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today on the 40 Days for Life podcast. I am Sean Carney, the president of 40 Days for Life, and your host for this podcast, which is dedicated to helping you end abortion where you live. If you have not already, sign up for free email alerts at 40daysforlife.com and follow us at 40 Days for Life. That is at the number 40 Days for Life. And today we have an episode that I encourage you to share with family and friends that, unfortunately for us as Americans, represents one of the darkest people ever to live in our country, because today we're going to talk about Margaret Sanger as we approach the unfortunate 100th anniversary here in October of 2016 of her founding the first birth control clinic in Brooklyn in 1916. That was her first birth control clinic, and we'll take you through the history of how that became Planned Parenthood Federation of America. And to take on such an important topic, I am joined today by Robert Cahoon in England. Robert, how are you today?
I'm doing extremely well, Sean. We've got another dark topic today.
Yes, we do. And so, but you still sound a little, you still have joy in your heart, which I always appreciate you, Robert. So you don't sound dark, but certainly the life of Margaret Singer is definitely dark. And we're going to talk about that. And we are joined by Steve Carlin, who can feel the chill in the air in Wisconsin as we dive into this topic.
Yes, it's cold. We've got a little bit of a cold topic today, but it's an important topic, and I think it's something that every pro-lifer needs to know. So I'm looking forward to delving into a topic, dark though it may be.
Margaret Sanger's life, guys, as you know, is one of those where you give some facts about her, you can quote her, you share just some of the basic facts of her life, and people look at you like you're crazy, like you're making it up. That just sounds like something pro-lifers made up. So in this podcast, we'll cover what the facts are and not the myths, not things that are made up, but things she actually said, believed, and acted on. And so if you do not know who Margaret Singer is, she was an American birth control activist, a sex educator, a writer, and even a nurse. She opened the first birth control clinic in the United States and then established organizations that became Planned Parenthood Federation of America. As I mentioned, this is the 100th anniversary of her starting her first birth control clinic, which was located in Brooklyn, New York. She opened that in 1916, and she was actually arrested for distributing information on contraception. In 1921, she founded the American Birth Control League, which later did become Planned Parenthood. And in 1929, she formed the National Committee on Federal Legislation for Birth Control, which was the focal point for her lobbying to legalize contraception in the United States. And from 1952 to 1959, she was the president of the International Planned Parenthood Federation, and she died in 1966. Just a little bit of background. Her mother went through 18 pregnancies. Her mom was a devout Catholic. Her father was not a devout Catholic. He was very hostile towards Catholicism and all Christianity. But Margaret was one of 11 children. There were 11 live births that her mom had out of those 18 pregnancies. And so she is number 6 in 11 children, and, became the advocate against children, perhaps more than anyone in her century. She died in 1966. She was 86 years old when she died. That was just a year after the Supreme Court case Griswold versus Connecticut legalized birth control. She died 1 year after that. And so we will sort of pause there and get into some of her. There's a lot of claims about her, and we will dive into those. But the first claim is that she was a racist, that this was eugenics, and the whole idea of some people should be born and some people shouldn't, and we should decide that comes from a very elitist attitude. And so she did a lot of controversial things, which Planned Parenthood distanced themselves on, including she gave a lecture to the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK, in 1926. And Steve, that kind of creates an awkward relationship that Planned Parenthood currently has with Margaret Sanger, who helped get them started.
Yeah, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance there because we see Planned Parenthood award the Margaret Sanger Award to the activist of their choosing. We see some Planned Parenthood clinics named after Margaret Sanger, but nobody ever really wants to get into the weeds, into the biography, into the history there. We look at a talk to the Ku Klux Klan. That's unthinkable. That's a non-starter. That's an automatic disqualifier. And yet here you have the founder of Planned Parenthood speaking prominently to the Ku Klux Klan and writing about it. And it's just unfathomable when you think about the evil that organization has done. And Planned Parenthood, they don't quite disown her, but yet they're still naming awards after her without really explaining to the public why.
Yeah, it always seems like that she's the grandma hanging in the living room that they honor and they revere and they sort of look at and they smile, but they won't discuss the details of her life or what she stood for, and they sure as heck do not quote her as much as the pro-life movement does. And before we get into some of this, I'm going to ask Robert to go through some of her quotes that she said publicly and proudly. But when you look at just the big picture, this is how we end up, with a culture like this, is that ideas have consequences. We did a podcast on the top 5 pro-life books, and in one of those books that we highly recommend is Architects of the Culture of Death, and it talks about the minds that created our modern day outlook on human life. And Margaret Sanger is one of the many bad characters highlighted in that book. And Robert, let's start going through some of the things that she said and believed and advocated for when it was much more controversial than it is today.
Well, Sean, that's right. And with Margaret Sanger's racist plans and eugenic goals, you'd think that Planned Parenthood today would hide her with other horrible skeleton in history's closet. But that's not necessarily the case. And as Steve mentioned, you've got an award, the Margaret Sanger Award today for journalists and artists who spread the culture of death in media. So it's quite crazy today that Planned Parenthood does hold Margaret Sanger with great esteem, celebrating this 100th anniversary. One of the things that she said was the most merciful thing that a large family does to one of its infant members is to kill it. She said that in the book Woman and the New Race in 1922. And she's been on record for calling for the extermination of human weeds, the cessation of charity, the segregation of morons, misfits, maladjusted, and the sterilization of genetically inferior races. There's no real dispute that she was both a racist and a eugenicist, founding the birth control review, building the foundation upon which Planned Parenthood is built on today. She publicly supported infanticide in Nazi Germany, championed Hitler's goal of white supremacy, and she also looked forward to seeing humanity free someday of the tyranny of Christianity. So it's a dark topic. She believed that 85% of the US population was morons and criminals unfit to have children. She also started the Negro Project, trying to sterilize and segregate undesirable African Americans from society. How Planned Parenthood today can possibly be proud of their eventual founder. She founded the organizations which became Planned Parenthood later on. It seems quite bizarre that this woman she's even recognized in the Smithsonian Museum today with other American well-known people too.
That arrogance too, to tell people they should not breed because they're idiots and they're morons and 85% of the population shouldn't breed. That is the ultimate elitism, and we see that now in our current times. We did a podcast with Catherine Britton about the growth of 40 Days for Life in South America, and we talked about with Catherine how Planned Parenthood will go down to South America and basically tell cultures that love families and love children, quit having children. And because you're poor, you're a minority, or you're not of the right race, here's here's birth control. It's a subtle message of you shouldn't have children, which is the most insulting thing we could ever share with another culture. And Steve, that's just rooted in racism.
It absolutely is. And I always kind of get a kick out of it because you don't hear Planned Parenthood talk about Margaret Sanger and her history, but you will find Planned Parenthood apologists try to cover for her. And so there's one quote that many pro-lifers know where Margaret Sanger said, "We should hire 3 or 4 colored ministers, preferably with social service backgrounds and with engaging personalities. The most successful educational approach to the Negro is through a religious appeal. We don't want word to get out that we want to exterminate the Negro population, and the minister is the man who can straighten out that idea if it ever occurs to any of their more rebellious members." Now, I think that quote stands on its own. Sometimes you will see apologists for Planned Parenthood saying, well, she simply wanted the word not to get out that they're trying to exterminate the Negro population because they really weren't trying to do that. But then you try to square that with some of Robert's quotes on white supremacy, with her speech to the KKK, and any claims that this was not a racially, eugenically motivated campaign that really borders on genocide. It's really hard for those claims to hold up.
It is. And I mean, you read that, and that's probably the quote she's most known for among pro-abortion people and pro-life people because it gets shared. It is basically, let's go to these stupid pastors and they'll lead us to the way to get rid of, quote, the Negro population, as she says. It's just appalling. And there's no way. I mean, you look at the race tension in America right now. I mean, she would be completely run out of the country. And yet Planned Parenthood honors her every single year with an award in her name. Robert, she didn't really stop there. She shared some other quotes on race.
Talking about some of the quotes of race, she talked about applying a stern and rigid policy of sterilization and segregation to that grade of the population whose progeny is tainted or whose inheritance is such that objectionable traits may be transmitted to offspring. Well, certainly she was a real social activist. She traveled all around the country from 2016 onwards to churches, women's clubs, to workers, liberals, socialists, writing many, many books as well, writing 2 autobiographies designed to promote the cause. But she really built that foundation of birth control upon which Planned Parenthood was later built upon, and she was the president of Planned Parenthood right until she served that role. Their first president, she served that role until she was 80 years old. And by that time, the International Planned Parenthood Federation in 1952 was the largest non-governmental international women's health organization. Now the headquarters are in London. She also traveled over to Britain while she was younger, and she was influenced by some of the atheists and some of the anarchists in Britain, Havelock Ellis and several other people as well. But what's without doubt is she's a staunch advocate of birth control to begin with. On top of that were her eugenic and racist views as well.
Yeah, and abortion is the ultimate of birth control. I mean, the whole mentality of birth control for her was certainly racist. For many people, it's just they want sex without kids, and the ultimate, most extreme version of that is actually killing the baby through an abortion. But this mentality that logically, this is how you end up with Planned Parenthood. This is how you end up with 1.2 million abortions every single year in the United States, 33 to 3,500 every single day in the United States, is this mentality that some people should not have children, and abortion is the solution to that. You don't want a baby, you can kill it. And one of her quotes, the extermination of human, or she's on record for calling the extermination of human weeds, the segregation of morons, misfits, and maladjusted, and the sterilization of genetically inferior races, which, of course, she decides who those people are. The inferior races don't get to decide that they're not inferior, unfortunately for them. But it's a complete elitist attitude, and it obviously led to the mentality that she supported the infanticide of Nazi Germany, and she certainly championed Hitler's goal of white supremacy. One of her quotes is, She looked forward to, quote, seeing humanity free someday of the tyranny of Christianity. And I actually like that quote because it shows the power of Christ and the power of Christianity, that in this dilapidated mentality, the enemy of this is Christ, because he is good, he is life, he is merciful, and he overcomes the circumstances that the rest of the world looks at and says, well, you really have to have an abortion. He's hope for the world. And the antithesis of that is a great Flannery O'Connor quote, wonderful Southern writer, who said that America is haunted by Christ. And sort of that whole idea, no matter what you say or what you preach or what you try to do to rid yourself of Christianity, you just can't ultimately do it. Chesterton says that the church is like a puddle, and you smash your foot in the middle of it to get rid of it, and the water just surrounds you and moves to the side. You can't really exterminate it. And that is certainly something that we're seeing, and we need to live our faith to combat this mentality. But we are going to take a quick break. We are talking about Margaret Sanger, who started the organization that led to Planned Parenthood Federation of America. This is the 100th anniversary of her founding her first birth control clinic in Brooklyn, New York. Planned Parenthood will be celebrating this anniversary. We should mourn it, and we should find the inspiration to educate ourselves and to fight against it in our culture, because this mentality is alive and well through the abortion industry. So I'm joined by Robert Cahoon in England and Steve Carlin in Wisconsin. We're talking about Margaret Singer, and we'll be back right after this.
Join over 675,000 people and enter into 40 days of prayer and fasting, community outreach, and peaceful vigil to end abortion where you live. Get free alerts about saved babies, abortion worker conversions, and abortion centers closing their doors by signing up for the email updates at 40daysforlife.com. Be inspired by the #1 Amazon top-rated Christian book, 40 Days for Life. This book was endorsed by St. John Paul II's biographer, George Weigel, and president of Focus of the Family, Jim Daly. Get yours today at Amazon.com or 40daysforlife.com.
Welcome back to the 40 Days for Life podcast. I am Sean Carney, your host, and I'm joined by Steve Carlin in Wisconsin and Robert Cahoon, who is across the pond. And I want to apologize to Robert on behalf of all Americans for the words and creation of Planned Parenthood that Margaret Singer did. She was one of the worst Americans ever to walk through the streets of our country, in my opinion, and I'm sure the opinion of many of our listeners. We are going through her life. We've covered a lot of the quotes. She started the organization that led to Planned Parenthood Federation of America, and they give an award every single year in her honor. Shamefully, they do that. And, it is our responsibility that we educate ourselves about this woman who the Planned Parenthood, honors every single year through an award, particularly on the 100th anniversary of Margaret Singer starting her first birth control clinic. And I want to go through some of the timeline of her life, because it's a time when a lot of these ideas about eugenics and racism and creating the perfect race that can dominate the inferior races, which Margaret Singer spoke about often, it did not happen overnight. And it's not going to go away overnight, which is why we need to get involved in the pro-life movement, and we need to be praying, and we need to be fasting. But in 1914, Margaret Singer first published her own paper, The Woman Rebel, and it recommends birth control and violence to achieve goals, to achieve an end. And she did that in 1914. And then, Robert, she didn't stop there.
That's right. In 1914, she was indicted for inciting murder and for violating obscenity laws, getting in trouble with the law. And in 1916, she, as we mentioned, opened the first birth control clinic. She was convicted in February 1917 and given a 3-day prison sentence. What's so extraordinary about Margaret Sanger is that she actually considered the name Planned Parenthood Federation of America to be too euphemistic, too euphemistic in the naming and too vague in its naming. And there's no need to apologise, Sean, for Margaret Sanger. Of course, the international headquarters of Planned Parenthood are based in London, but we do have Mary Stopes, who was a British woman, pretty much the equal of Margaret Sanger, who set up Mary Stopes, the first birth control clinic here in Holloway in the United Kingdom. So we have a very, very similar figure from roughly the same period. She wrote love letters to Adolf Hitler as well, and has a similarly outrageous history as Margaret Sanger too. So after, tell us a little bit more, Steve, about some of the timeline of Margaret Sanger.
If you skip ahead just a year to 1917, Margaret Sanger published the Birth Control Review to promote birth control and eugenics. And you talk, Robert, about euphemisms. There were no euphemisms in the content of this publication. She said, well, I personally believe in the sterilization of the feeble-minded, the insane, and the syphilitic. My goodness, pull that word out next time you play Scrabble. I have not been able to discover that these measures are more than superficial deterrents when applied to the constantly growing stream of the unfit. They are excellent means of meeting a certain phase of the situation, but I believe in regard to these, as in regard to other eugenic means, that they do not go to the bottom of the matter. Well, that, I think, really hits the nail on the head, that it doesn't go to the bottom of the matter, because birth control wasn't the end. Planned Parenthood, of course, now is America's leading promoter and performer of abortions. And so we see, yes, they're getting to the bottom of the matter there.
In 1920, in The Woman and the New Race, Sanger wrote that the birth control is nothing more or less than the facilitation of the process of weeding out the unfit, of preventing the birth of defectives and of those who will become defectives. And of course, in 1920, pretty much abortion was very much unthinkable, along with contraception, and she would have been considered a sort of a revolutionary of this period in the 1920s. She founded the Birth Control League in 1921, which merged in 1939 with the Birth Control Clinical Research Bureau as well. But they removed the words birth control in the hope of having a new public image, having a new name for a better PR on the front. She also wrote in the book The Pivot of Civilization in 1922, organized charity is itself the symptom of a malignant social disease. I think really from these quotes, it really goes to the heart of who she was as a person. I know that she didn't fully believe in abortion throughout her life, but gradually as the birth control movement gained momentum, it created the foundation from which the abortion movement started.
I think it's kind of funny as we proceed through this timeline. You know, for so long, you'd hear the comments from abortion supporters, things like, keep your rosaries off my ovaries. And the suggestion, of course, is that people should be free to do what they want as individuals. But in 1925, Margaret Sanger sort of betrayed that approach by saying that birth control is not merely an individual problem. It is not merely a national question. It concerns the whole wide world, the ultimate destiny of the human race. We must clear the way for a better world. We must cultivate our garden. And I think that's just an interesting way to put it, because that becomes beyond a matter of autonomous freedom. That becomes the basis for really coercive policies that we've talked about across the world, and that we're even now beginning to see in some cases in the United States and the Western world.
Yeah, and the whole wide world and the ultimate destiny of the human race. Some of her just broad strokes of, birth control comes from people who want control. And you can see that in her vocabulary. We must clear the way. We, meaning her and the other psychos, we must clear the way for a better world. We must cultivate our garden. This is somebody who these ideas she completely bought in, and it didn't go by. We keep referencing, like, you just read some of this stuff, and for us, we're all three of us, we're under 35, and so we didn't grow up in I didn't anyways, in a racist America. We studied the civil rights, but we didn't live through that time period. And yet you read these quotes and it it looks like it's from somebody who's completely insane, and she was insane. And yet, that has consequences, because it's not like she lived and did some writings and she was just kind of an odd bird and then she died. This is lived out in every surgical abortion that you see. Listen to the reasons that people give to justify abortion, but the ultimate justification is that, look, I mean, they're really poor. They just shouldn't have children. Or what are they going to do if the baby's deformed? Or what are they going to do with their other kids? It is this eugenics, cold, calculated mentality that comes straight from Margaret Sanger.
There seems to be a little bit of self-loathing in that, doesn't there, Sean? You talked about Margaret Sanger's background a little bit, that she was the sixth of 11 children, and her father was very anti-Christian, and as a result, he lost business, and that sort of led to the family living in poverty, and Margaret Sanger had an experience of large families that involved poverty, but it makes me wonder how she felt about herself, because she would seem to be one of those human weeds that she so derisively dismisses as unfit for life. I'm really curious as to how that works into her psychology.
Yeah, we could have a 9-day or maybe even 9-year podcast episode on the psychology of everything that she's dealing with. But she was not only struggling with that, she acted on it, and she went all in. This is an angry person. It's a racist person, and it's a bitter person, and that has had grave consequences, certainly for anybody who's walked into a Planned Parenthood and had an abortion, or been counseled to have an abortion, or found out later that they had an abortion and their little boy or little girl's baby body parts were sold or trafficked across state lines. This is how we end up in this mentality. That's why I mentioned the top 5 pro-life books. Everybody looks up at our culture like, how in the world did we get here? What's the world coming to? And it did not happen overnight. I mean, this timeline that we started was 1914 is when she started all of this and started writing and started kind of stirring the pot. And that when it goes unchecked and it goes certainly funded by the government, it grows and it gets marketing and it gets talking points, and it can appear to be normal and a freedom and a choice and nice and clean and comfortable. But the mentality that the abortion industry is built on, she was at least honest about it. That's why Planned Parenthood won't quote her, because she was one of the most honest people that was ever part of their organization. She's one of the founders.
And she was a prolific writer. I mean, Margaret Sanger spent a great deal of time communicating with the public. In the 1920s, over 500,000 copies of her book, Woman in the New Race and Pivot of Civilization, were sold as well. And, in these books, really her eugenic approach to life, where she called for a rigid policy of sterilization and segregation to that grade of population whose progeny is tainted or whose inheritance is such that objectionable traits may be transmitted to offspring. She was uncompromising in her language, and as I mentioned before, started a Nego project, trying out to weed out the unfit from the black population. That she believed that there were people around who should have never been born at all. And today we live with her legacy. Her legacy lives on, and it's extraordinary. She was also an inspiration for Wonder Woman, the comic character made by William Marston in 1941 as well. What's extraordinary is that Planned Parenthood hasn't fully distanced themselves from their extraordinary founder, and that this is almost like a sort of Hollywood movie. You couldn't really make this stuff up.
You can. I mean, her quote, it's very simple, and it's the intention too. This is why this leads to abortion. I mean, birth control must lead ultimately to a cleaner race. This is one of her simple, I think a lot of people, some people, they believe that. Birth control should lead to ultimately a cleaner race. That's why we need to go to Africa and give them birth control. We need to go to South America and give them birth control. And that all leads to abortion. There's no separation mentally for Planned Parenthood. One leads to the other. Abortion is the ultimate contraceptive. It's the ultimate form of birth control. But when you say that it is to lead to a cleaner race, it really sounds horrible. But if you say, well, we need birth control because some people they're not really ready for kids, or they're not intending to have kids, somehow it sounds ironically cleaner. No pun intended.
I think one of the things that really strikes me is you hear that ideas have consequences and bad ideas have really bad consequences. And we have seen a lot of rotten fruit emerge from all of these writings, all of these bad philosophies, all of these approaches to human nature.
Absolutely. And, I think that when we talk about Margaret Sanger and her life, people are like, yeah, but what difference does that make? She lived, forever ago. She died at 86. Was that in 1966, we said. And so, how does that relate to me today? But it is the same mentality that drives the abortion industry. And that's why, those videos came out that David DeLeiden released, or you see some of these reports that come out from Planned Parenthood, whether it's through Lila Rose or through other things. And it's a dirty business. It's a dangerous business because it's built on a dangerous mentality. And Steve, take us through a few of the last quotes, and then we will wrap up.
Sure. We see just a whole lot of the same. As an advocate of birth control, I wish to point out that the unbalance between the birth rate of the unfit and the fit. I mean, again, she's determining who's fit and who's not. That's a awfully big responsibility. Like the advocates of birth control, the eugenists, for instance, are seeking to assist the race toward the elimination of the unfit. I mean, a word like elimination, that's no euphemism.
No. And after that quote and just the elimination of the unfit, you just want to stare at her and, be like, pardon? What was that last part? How crazy are you? And yet this is the mentality that the abortion industry is built on. And I think that it's important for us to know our history, to know where we come from as ambassadors for the Gospels and for goodness and truth and innocence. There's no innocence in the comments of Margaret Sanger. There's no innocence, and we don't know what happened to her. And we joke about her psychology and how long it would take to break all that open. But this is a hurting person who took it out on the culture and who took it out on other women, and who certainly ended up taking it out on the unborn. Is her legacy as the person who helped start Planned Parenthood Federation of America, who does not do 10 or 11 or 12 abortions per year, as horrific as that would be, but does, over 300,000 every single year. And that is when you talk about people as unfit, when you want a cleaner race, when you talk about inferior races, that mentality that always leads to eugenics, and it always leads to the destruction of innocent human life. And there was no innocence in the life of Margaret Singer. There was pain, there was hurt, and it showed. And if I were Planned Parenthood today, I wouldn't talk about her either. But the reality is that this mentality is very much alive, and the solution is beauty and joy and love. And that is why we see so many moms turn around at the very last moment. That is why, Margaret Sanger is no longer alive, but you are alive. And you can go out and you can pray, you can fast, you can be part of 40 Days for Life, but you can share this podcast and educate yourself and educate other people. Just have a basic knowledge. That's why we made this simple. We had quotes, we had a timeline, so that you just have basic tools to use when speaking and helping others understand this organization that gets $500 million a year in tax funding. And so it is just shameful, and it was started by one of the most shameful women. And just compare her to some of the to some of the saints, particularly Mother Teresa, who the world has been honoring as we reflect on her life after the canonization back in September. What a beautiful life of joy and of innocence and of life. And there's no way Mother Teresa ever looked at the poorest of the poor around Calcutta and said, you're unfit and you're a threat to, you're part of the inferior race. That is the joy of the cross. That is the joy of Christ, that we love everybody and that we care for everybody, not because we want a better life, but because we love because we are loved by God the Father, and that should overflow into our love for our fellow man, which Margaret Singer simply did not do. And so we ask you for your prayers, for your participation, and for your willingness to go out and to peacefully pray in front of Planned Parenthood. You can find information on the current or next 40 Days for Life campaign at 40daysforlife.com. That's the number 40daysforlife.com. The best thing to do is to pray, to be hopeful, and to know that you can be part of the beginning of the end of abortion. God bless you.